Hello, I'm Emma, a 36-year-old mom to a wonderful 7-year-old named Andrew. Recently, my life has been pretty chaotic, and it's all because of my lousy ex-husband. You know the type, the one you wish you dealt with a long time ago. That's him. We met in college and went through some big life events together. We graduated, moved to Chicago, and supported each other when we first got jobs. We built a life together, but I don't want to overstate things. Josh has always been an average guy. He wasn't super successful or rich. We got together when I was in a vulnerable place because my mom had been diagnosed with cancer. Josh came along at that time and gave me the support I needed. Then, on one memorable Thanksgiving, Josh surprised everyone by getting down on one knee and proposing. It was a beautiful moment. I said yes, and we decided to get married. As a wedding gift, my parents gave us a mansion they owned. It was an amazing gesture and a great start to our life together as husband and wife. Then we had Andrew, our baby boy. Becoming a mom gave me clarity about my life and purpose, but Josh seemed lost. While I thrived in my well-paying job, Josh was struggling. He jumped from one job to another, never staying at one for more than a month. Our relationship hit a rough patch. At first, I thought things would get better, but I noticed subtle changes in Josh's behavior. He seemed unhappy with his financial situation. I earned more than him, which shouldn't have been an issue, but it hurt his ego. One day, I found some clues that suggested Josh was involved in illegal activities. I couldn't confront him directly because I knew he'd feel attacked and get defensive. I knew the company he worked for and was surprised by how much money he seemed to be making. It just didn't add up. It felt like I was walking on eggshells around him, and it was really tough. Finally, I had enough. One evening, I got the courage to have a serious talk with him. To my surprise, he didn't get defensive. He admitted to the illegal stuff and his messed up reasons for doing it. He told me he'd been using the company's credit cards for his own expenses and embezzling money. He said it hurt his ego that I earned more than him, and that we lived in a house that was mine, not his. When Andrew was born, things got even worse for him. He felt ashamed that he wasn't the one providing for our family, and he got tangled up in embezzlement to make more money. His confession about the illegal activities was the final blow to our already fragile relationship. My priority was Andrew, my sweet little boy. I couldn't stand the thought of him growing up with a father involved in criminal activities. Josh was not the role model I wanted for him, and I was scared of the consequences of Josh's actions on our family. Who knew what he would do next and how it would affect our lives? I couldn't take that risk, especially with Andrew's future at stake. I wanted the best for my son, Andrew, so I did what any mother would do. We got a divorce and shared custody of Andrew. Breaking free from the toxic situation we were in was scary, but it was also freeing. It's been a smooth year and a few months since the divorce, and things were going well. We had a system. Josh would take Andrew on weekends, and we kept communication minimal. Josh mentioned getting married again, and honestly, if he finds someone who makes him happy, that's his business. Our divorce wasn't even that messy, so it was just an ordinary Monday morning. Andrew got on the school bus, and I started my day. I did some chores and took our dog, Archer, for a walk. Just typical mom stuff. I work as a social media manager for a lifestyle magazine, so I mostly work from home, except for 2 days in the office. I was in my study, getting into my work groove, when I heard a woman's voice calling my name from downstairs. It didn't sound like any of my close friends dropping by for a surprise visit. I went downstairs and there she was, a blonde woman who had barged into my house. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. Then it hit me, it was Claire, Josh's new wife. Emma, finally. I think we need to talk. Oh, hi, Claire. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but go ahead. So how long do you plan on staying here? I mean, okay, Josh helped you out at first because you're the mother of his child and because Andrew is with you. But I think it's time you figured out your stuff. It's been months. Hold up. What are you talking about, Claire? I'm just tired of living in a tiny apartment. It's cramped and I couldn't even invite my family and friends over for Christmas. It's really tough to make memories in such a small space. I can see why you and Andrew love it here. It's like a dream home. But the truth is, this place belongs to Josh, and he's been kind enough not to say anything about it. Still, I want a fresh start, a new life right here. I just want us to find a solution that works for everyone. Maybe we could look for a place nearby, somewhere where you and Andrew could still have stability, and I could create a home with Josh. You need to leave. Who told you that, Claire? This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my parents. No need to hide it from me. Josh already told me how you've been spreading rumors that the house is yours and badmouthing him for not being successful. I don't know what's going on between you two, but talking negatively about a guy who's letting you stay under his roof? And think about your son. What kind of picture are you painting of his dad? Hold on, Claire. I'm curious, who's been telling you all this? Let me set things straight. This house is definitely mine, and honestly, Josh is the last person I want to talk about. But Josh said that he owns this place and that it's his. Why would I lie to you? I can show you the paperwork that proves this house is mine. When I got married, my parents gifted me this place and made me the owner. And as for getting my life together, I already have a job that supports me and my son. I don't know what to believe anymore. I was pretty sure Josh had kept Claire in the dark about the house's ownership. Do you have some time, Claire? Yes, I do. Great, let's sit down and have a chat. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, tea, maybe some water. A cup of tea would be nice. Claire followed me into the living room and sat on the couch. I headed upstairs to find the paperwork, understanding that Claire needed proof, and I couldn't blame her. Who knows how long Josh had been lying to her about the house? After finding the documents, I returned to the living room and handed them to Claire. While she looked through the paperwork, I prepared some hot peppermint tea for us. I'm sorry for blaming you like that, Claire said. It's not an excuse, but you have no idea about the things Josh has been saying about you. What kind of things has he been saying? I asked. All kinds of stuff, Claire replied. He said you were suspicious and crazy during your marriage, and that he had to divorce you because he couldn't handle it anymore. He even pretends to be concerned about Andrew having a mom like you. Josh has been spreading a false story to me and everyone else, claiming that he owns this mansion. According to him, after the divorce, you were struggling and needed time to get back on your feet. As a supposed act of kindness, he offered you this place to stay. He's been boasting about this at dinner parties with his work friends and on vacations with my family. It's like he's turned it into his favorite topic whenever someone mentions you or the divorce. He even said he gave you warning signs, implying that you were clinging to the house. I couldn't believe the rumors Josh had been spreading about me. He was totally trashing my reputation, making it seem like I was a helpless mess after the divorce, relying on his so-called kindness for support. To be honest, I never really doubted Claire for a second. Josh had always been a shady character with his own secrets. The main reason for our separation was because of his involvement in white-collar crimes. Back then, I was still kind of hung up on him, which made me hesitant to expose him. I thought I was in love, but looking back, I definitely made a mistake. I was in a tough spot when it came to Josh. I didn't want him anywhere near our son, but at the same time, I didn't want to see him end up in prison. So I made an excuse about growing out of the relationship and decided to leave quietly. But finding out he's been acting all high and mighty, going around like he's my knight in shining armor, I wasn't going to let that slide. I decided to lay everything out in the open. Claire, there's something you need to know. I'm not sure what Josh told you about why we separated, but I haven't been completely honest with you either. What do you mean, Emma? You see, Josh was involved in embezzlement. Yeah, it was a tough situation. I confronted Josh about his actions, and he finally confessed to using his company's credit card for his own personal use. I was torn between wanting to protect him and feeling the need to do what was right. In the end, I decided not to turn him into the police, but I think he got away with it. Wait, Emma, you're saying Josh, my husband, got tangled up in freaking embezzlement? Seriously? I can't even wrap my head around that. I know, I didn't believe it either. I wanted to protect Andrew from all of this. Josh was still my husband, and I couldn't bring myself to turn him in, but I did what I thought was best for Andrew. I didn't want him to grow up with a father involved in illegal activities. I had to put his safety and future first. Wait, what if he's still pulling off fraud? He never got caught for what he did. If he's not been caught, he's probably still at it. This is blowing my mind. I mean, this is the guy I married. Wow, sorry, I'm just processing all of this. It's a lot to handle. I need to figure out if he's still tangled up in that mess. We can't just let it slide this time. Well, I can think of a plan. Isn't Josh's birthday in 2 weeks? Yes, it is. I've got a genius plan to finally expose him to everyone, Claire. You won't believe the epic idea I've got, so picture this. What if you ask Josh if we could throw his birthday bash at, well, let's just call it his mansion, you know my place. Use all your powers of persuasion until he can't resist saying a big fat yes. We'll invite all his work buddies, basically everyone he's ever met. And then comes the piece de resistance. We'll drop a super special announcement and give him his birthday surprise. Count me in. Take down my number. Claire totally nailed convincing Josh about the big party because when Josh came to pick up Andrew for their weekend together, he asked me about it. Hey Emma, I need to ask you for a favor. Of course, Josh, what is it? Well, Claire wants to throw a big birthday celebration for me, and she wants to invite all my coworkers, her family, and pretty much everyone she knows. The thing is, our place is like a sardine can, and it's just not going to fit all those people. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to let us use your mansion for the party? Andrew would be thrilled about the idea as well. Josh was completely oblivious to the trap we had set for him. Little did he know that he was walking right into our carefully crafted plan. All right, Josh, I'll think about it. The mansion is available, but I'll need to check with work to see if I can get the day off. I'll let you know. Thanks, Emma, Josh said. And there's something else. I know it's a big favor to ask, but could you pretend that the mansion is mine during the party? It would be embarrassing in front of my coworkers and in-laws if they found out I had to borrow your place. I don't want to look like a total loser and maybe let's not tell Claire about it either. Typical Josh. Well, I don't know, Josh. That seems like a pretty huge thing to keep a secret. I'll have to think about it, but I can't guarantee anything. I know, it's a bit of a stretch. But just think about it. I'd owe you a lot if you'd help me out. Well, I've got to go now. Just text me and let me know, okay? Bye. And just like that, everything fell into place. I texted Claire, letting her know that the plan was a go, and asked her to send out the invites to everyone for Josh's big day. A few days later, I gave Josh the green light to celebrate his birthday at my place and promised to keep his little secret. The big day had finally arrived, Josh's birthday. He walked in with Claire, and we acted all casual, but little did he know that we had a whole plan brewing behind the scenes. Andrew was pumped to see his dad, but I couldn't ignore the hurt and betrayal I felt. I had protected Josh and kept his secrets, and in return he spread lies about me and our marriage. I was done being the good guy, and it was time to change that. As the guests started rolling in, I couldn't help but observe Josh putting on his charming act, trying to look perfect and flawless. But little did he know that his lies were about to be exposed. All of his friends, coworkers, and family members filled my house, totally clueless about what was going to happen. Finally, when almost everyone had arrived, Claire and I gathered everyone around. Hey everyone, so we're all gathered here to give a shout out to Josh today. But if we're going to raise a glass to the guy, it's only fair that you know what he's really about. It's easy to talk smack and spread gossip, but believe me, the truth has a way of showing up. Now, you might be curious about how Claire and I, the ex and the current wife, can actually get along. Well, here's the lowdown. We've both been through the Josh experience, and he has been fooling us around. Josh jumped in. Whoa, hold up, Emma, what's going on? Did you maybe hit the drinks a bit too hard? No worries, everyone, you can just go back to whatever you were up to. I have the situation under control. Hey Josh, just give her a chance to speak, Claire said. I know Josh might have been running his mouth and spreading lies about me, making me look like the crazy one for divorcing him or whatever. But let me set the record straight. There is only one reason why I left him, and that is because he was involved in some shady fraud. Thanks to Claire, the truth came out. Josh has been yapping about how this mansion belongs to him. Well, newsflash, it's actually mine. I've been working to raise my kid while Mr. Fraud over here has been stealing money from companies. The truth behind why I split with Josh is that he was mixed up in embezzlement. I didn't have the guts to call him out on it before, but I'm not holding back anymore. Claire, I don't know what Emma's been telling you, but I promise you it's not what you think. You guys, there's been a mistake, Josh said, trying to regain control. Cut the crap, Josh, Claire snapped. Emma's been real with me, and I know all about your sketchy stuff. It's hard to believe I fell for your stories. Seriously, did you marry me just because you needed a new crash pad after Emma gave you the boot? Well, people, just so you know, the authorities are in the loop, and they'll be showing up any moment. It looks like the party's a no-go today. Seeing as this is my place and not Josh's, you're all free to take off. Are you for real, Emma? You wrecked everything for me. And Claire, seriously, you were in on this? How could you go behind my back with my ex-wife? You too, I'm out of here. The cops are on their way, Josh. It might be a good move to get your lawyer to sort this out, I said. And that's how I finally took care of what needed to be done a long time ago. From what I heard from Claire, there was an ongoing investigation into Josh, and he was found guilty of stealing from the company he used to work for. And not just that, the company he was currently working for also discovered some unexplainable changes in their accounting records. It turns out he was still up to his old tricks, stealing from people. As a result, he had to pay a hefty fine of $110,000 and is now facing a 2-year prison sentence. I tried to shield Andrew from all this for as long as I could, but eventually I had to tell him the truth about his dad and how he wasn't a good man. It has been tough on him, and he still misses his dad at times, but he understands the situation. Exposing Josh and bringing his shady activities to light has been like lifting a weight off my shoulders. I feel so much more liberated now. It's true that sometimes you want to trust people and give them a second chance because everyone deserves one, right? But then there are people like Josh who just don't change. I'm fully embracing my life as a single mom. My priority is Andrew's happiness and well-being, and I won't let anyone drive us down again. My friendship with Claire has been comforting too. It's funny how life can lead to unexpected friendships. It's like I finally dealt with my unfinished business and moved on.
When I got to the next beautiful spot in my rental car, my mother-in-law called. As if she had been there the whole time, it was my wife's mom. Then I asked, "Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's up?" With a knowing look at my husband David. On the other end, her voice was crazy. "Leave David alone right now. Get your clothes in a bag and go to the bus stop by the rocks. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is going to hit you. He's hiding a gun in the car." That's the game she was following. I can't believe David would. "Okay, I'll leave right away." Even though my answer was a little flat, it seemed to have persuaded her. She hung up right away. "My name is Emily Johnson, and I'm 29 years old. I work in an office. David and I got married last year, but because of the COVID outbreak, we only recorded our marriage. Because we've been able to travel since the plague is over, we're planning our late vacation. Our bosses were flexible and let us take time off for our vacation. We picked a national park because we wanted to take lots of pictures, even though we haven't been married in a while. David likes to edit videos for fun, while I like to take pictures of landscapes. We've even talked about making a YouTube account just for landscape movies. Since we got married, our life has been quiet but happy, but there has been one worry. Mrs. Johnson, David's mom. Her son David has always made her happy. Whenever David and I talked about getting married, she always seemed to be against me. Her sneaky advances against me in meetings happen all the time, and what's worse is that she does them without David knowing. Insidiously, she would disparage me whenever I received compliments or expressed myself during a family gathering. "Emily, did you make the stew? There's no one else like this dish around here, but it tastes good. That tastes really good. Could you tell me how to make the stew? I'd like to make it at home if it's easy. Did you enjoy it? I'm happy. I'm going to write down the recipe right now." "That's fine, Emily, but you might also want to learn some local recipes. It will make people praise you more." It works like that most of the time. She is not complimenting my one-of-a-kind stew. Instead, she is telling me to stick to the traditional recipes and not stand out. In fact, there was a lot of snark when the family left and Mrs. Johnson and I were doing the dishes alone. A frightening woman who was always striving to stand out by preparing such a salty stew and intended to give our family hypertension or something. I took a bite. "Was it too salty for you?" Next time, I'll use less salt. I no longer even want to eat your salty stew. Next time, do something more traditional. But when David comes around, she acts much differently. Uncle John told Emily, "Thanks for the stew recipe. Your dish seemed to be a hit with everyone." "Really then? That's wonderful. What do you want to eat tomorrow?" "David, Emily, and I are going to make it together." She would smile and smile her way into our talk. To change the subject, it's so obvious that it's hard to be mad about it. After that, it became kind of a joke for us. The funny part is that David already knows about her double dealing and sly jabs. I'm always in trouble with Mrs. Johnson when her son isn't around because she thinks he doesn't see. But David, my husband, already knows her and even films or records her in secret when things get too bad. David has never liked how his mother's love is too much, which is really just too much meddling. It seems to have even crushed his hopes for the future. So when we got married, David, not me, said we couldn't live together. Even though it was a happy event, Mrs. Johnson seems to believe that I was the one who lied to him. She can't see anything around her because she loves her son too much. I'm afraid she'll do something stupid soon. Another thing is that we finally chose the details for our late trip. With our interests in mind, we chose a trip through some of the country's most beautiful spots. I'm happily getting cameras and other tools ready. David is also getting a smartphone to record movies that doesn't have a SIM card. That's why we packed a bag with clothes and toiletries. On this trip, we'll be able to see mountains and drops. I want to take beautiful pictures, so we need to check the weather forecast too. That's right. Misty and beautiful landscapes are hard to describe, but I really hope it's sunny today. As we continue to get ready, we laugh together. But Mrs. Johnson still gets in the way, even now. That was a call. Like I said, it's Mrs. Johnson. "Hello," I said when I picked up the phone in front of David. I quickly put it on speakers. "Hi, Kate, Emily. Are you really going to go on the trip with David? You've been married for more than a year, and now you're taking a honeymoon? What do you think?" It looks like she doesn't want me to go on vacation with my husband. To deal with this, the best thing to do is show off your trip. Well, we finally don't have to follow any rules. David's business and mine have both agreed to let us take time off for our vacation, which we're going to make the most of. She took my bait and became my wife. What do you mean, have fun? It's probably just a bad trip and a cheap hotel. I feel bad for David. The things Mrs. Johnson said made David frown and keep quiet. David was the one who planned this trip, not a travel agency. I changed how I spoke after seeing David's face. No, it's not a cheap hotel at all. David set everything up. We're staying at a very fancy hotel with a great view. The food is also 5 stars, but the prices are very low. I spoke nicely on purpose to make Mrs. Johnson angry. I'm always getting picked on, and this time she was making fun of the trip that David planned. A really high-end hotel. Why do you want to go with David? I want to go on that trip. David would want to show me how thankful he is for his family. After hearing about the very fancy hotel, she couldn't keep quiet. Now she's saying she wants to go on the trip herself. This is not the kind of honeymoon that a mother would crash. It's not going to happen. It's rude to step in on your son and daughter-in-law's long-awaited vacation. We'll make sure you have a souvenir. Saying goodbye, I hung up the phone, picturing Mrs. Johnson's angry face. I laughed meanly, and when I hung up, David had his head held up in front of me. I'm sorry about my mom, Emily. She tried to ruin our holiday, which I can't believe. She probably just wanted to express her deep affection for her son, she explained. Don't be worried about it. There was a hint of worry in my voice as I smiled at David, because I was so angry at her. I beat her at her own game, but I might have failed. What would happen if Mrs. Johnson got really excited about our vacation and started bothering us? This fear of mine turned out to be right in the end. From that point on until the trip left, Mrs. Johnson didn't say a word, not even a call. I thought she would tell David bad things about me. That also didn't happen. Even though her quiet scared me, we went on our getaway as planned. David's choice of beautiful places worked out perfectly, and I was happy with the whole thing. It was the best in every way. The view, the services, the food, everything. That's why I told Mrs. Johnson how great it was. We even asked the hotel staff to take a shot of us having dinner together. David, I'm so full. Thank you so much for setting this all up, I said as I fell asleep on the hotel bed. It felt so soft and cozy on the bed. David, my husband, was very happy to see me rolling around in bed. He said, I'm glad you like it. Let's go to the spa after you've had a chance to rest. I'll look at the pictures and movies we took today while we wait. The health spa. What a wonderful place. David suddenly raised his voice. He had been opening his laptop and watching me enjoy the soft bed. I finally asked, what's going on here? When I heard something strange in David's voice, I got out of bed and looked at his computer. Our plan for today was to rent a car and get around. We parked the rental car and took pictures and movies at every beautiful place we went. In some places, you could see the rental car in the background. That wasn't a problem in and of itself, but there were times when a strange person, who looked like a small woman, was hanging out near the rental car. Even though we couldn't see her face, we thought the strange person was a small woman. The suspect was opening the car door every once in a while. Oh, look at this. Because we were only there for a short time, we didn't lock the car, David said in a low voice through the screen. I knew what kind of hat the suspicious person was wearing. Hey, this hat. Doesn't Mrs. Johnson have one like this? When I said, yes, Mrs. Johnson has a similar hat, David's face went pale. That's correct. This is my mom's hat. David and I looked at the computer screen with wide eyes. The person who seemed sketchy was putting something black into the rental car. They looked like Mrs. Johnson. She looked like she was taking something out of the trip bag that she had left in the rental car. Then, after some time, the strange person left without taking anything. Something was put in the bag for the trip. I quickly threw it out. It had a strange weight to it. I didn't notice the change in weight because the bellman carried it for us when we got to the hotel. It was a bag with clothes and toiletries in it, but nothing important. It looked like nothing was stolen. After that, a strange thing came out of the bottom of the bag. What came out shocked David and me. What is this? You're kidding me. We were both very tired when we left the hotel the next morning. Because of the amazing thing that came out of the bag the day before, we were very busy. The phone almost always rang at the exact moment we got to the next beautiful spot in the rental car. It came from Mrs. Johnson. David was on the phone, so I told him to pick up. Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's going on? The person on the other end of the phone from Mrs. Johnson sounded very upset. Get away from my kid right now. Get the bag with extra clothes in it and go to the Cape's bus stop. How does she know there's a bus stop close to the Cape where we're on vacation? What about our luggage? How does she know about things like the bag with the extra clothes? She called at just the right time, so I think she's probably hiding and watching somewhere. There were a lot of confusing parts of the call, so I asked Mrs. Johnson for a reason. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is getting ready to attack you? He has a gun hidden in the car. Oh, I see. That's the case. I pretended to follow Mrs. Johnson's lead. Even though I already knew everything, it's not possible. David is hitting me. Okay, I get it. I'm leaving now. Even though my answer was a little stiff, I think I was able to trick Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson hung up right away. I waved to David, who was driving, and then took the bag and went to the bus stop. I didn't forget to act scared, of course. After that, I called the cops. After about 5 minutes, I got to the Cape's bus stop, where an investigator in an unmarked police car met me. Well, yesterday's prediction came true. The agent looked upset and said, I never thought you'd really call it in. I'm truly sorry that I took part in this joke. Please come with me. I think David should have caught Mrs. Johnson by now. As I drove back to the rental car, the investigator followed me in his plainclothes car. Yes, I could hear Mrs. Johnson's words from where we parked the rental car. Hey, David, how did you know where I was? It looked like Mrs. Johnson had no idea that her evil plan would be found out ahead of time. My husband found her hiding in the shade of a gazebo in the parking lot and caught her. Not right now. Today, I won't forgive you. Mrs. Johnson was scared by the way her husband looked like a demon. She was even more shocked when she saw me come back with the detective. As Mrs. Johnson had planned, I had a travel bag in my hand. The moment Mrs. Johnson saw it, she yelled, "Officer, arrest that woman right away. There's a gun in that bag," she says. "She wants to use it to kill my son." Mrs. Johnson yelled at me in that manner, displaying a proud expression as she did so. I stood still in front of Mrs. Johnson and dumped the bag's contents on the ground. The pants were wrapped up in a small bag so that the men wouldn't be able to see them. While Mrs. Johnson looked for something, she couldn't find it. "What? Where is the gun? It should be there since I put it there yesterday. Is this the gun you are looking for?" The detective showed Mrs. Johnson a picture. It was a picture of a hunting gun put in a plastic bag. Upon seeing the picture the detective showed, Mrs. Johnson's face went pale. "That shooting gun belonged to my late father-in-law, didn't it? Honestly, how did you manage to open the gun safe? When I found it yesterday, I thought my heart would stop. I gave it to the cops right away after calling them." Mrs. Johnson clenched her teeth and looked down when she heard my voice and the voice of my husband. "Oh, Emily is to blame because it was in her bag. It has nothing to do with me." Mrs. Johnson began yelling out of panic. My husband and I both let out big sighs. The officer then came up to Mrs. Johnson with a big smile on his face. "Yes, we had to ask Emily about it since it was in her bag. Yesterday was supposed to be a holiday, but we questioned her for hours. Why did you know that Emily's gun was in her room bag?" Even though the detective was happy, his voice was soft. "I can see why he's mad. Besides, the shooting gun was taken out without permission, even though it wasn't trained. It was in Emily's bag, though." Because Mrs. Johnson couldn't face the detective, she desperately tried to explain herself. "Oh, so you saw Emily's travel preparations, but you and Emily's family are separated, aren't you?" "Of course, we're separated, and we haven't let her into our house for a year." When that was said, Mrs. Johnson yelled back, "Don't speak out of turn." The police officer pressed Mrs. Johnson even more. "Oh no, were you watching Emily's house? No, that's not a good thing to do. You need to go to the station with us." Mr. Johnson freaked out when she heard the detective's line, which sounded like it came straight from a police show. "No, I wasn't spying, so you can't take me against my will. I put that gun in there." "Oh, she told everyone on her own." "Well, I had already said it earlier when I turned the bat inside out." Before this, the detective had been happy, but now he wasn't. "All right, a confession. You'll be coming with us on your own because you broke the gun rule." Mrs. Johnson was shocked when the detective spoke. "What? Why? Didn't I say I wasn't spying?" When Mrs. Johnson spoke out against it, her son got very angry. "It makes sense, Mom. The gun your dad gave you was yours, but you don't have a shooting license. There would be no problem if the father-in-law, who had a shooting license, carried it properly for the right reason. You can't take it out of the gun safe because you don't have a shooting license." Mrs. Johnson didn't seem to know anything about gun rules or how to handle guns. I don't know how she got it this far without an accident, even though the live ammo was kept separate and not put into the gun. Even so, Mrs. Johnson still refused. But it had to be in that woman's bag when it was found at the hotel. That woman took it from my house. I'm not to blame. His mother, Mrs. Johnson, was acting badly, so her son got angry. I recorded yesterday when Mom put a gun in her rental car. Of course, I gave it to the cops. What David said made Mrs. Johnson weak in the knees. "What? How? How did you learn about it?" She was so angry that tears filled her eyes. I told them instead of him. Yesterday, David was recording and got a shot of the parking lot. We didn't see it at the time, but we did see it when we watched the video at the hotel. Mrs. Johnson could no longer disagree with what I said. At this point, the officer told Mrs. Johnson, who was shocked, "Now, Mrs. Kate Johnson, we'd like you to come with us to the station because we think you broke gun laws." When David said those words, Mrs. Johnson's face turned sad. Why, David? Why is that woman better than me? Are you leaving your mom? The detective pushed Mrs. Johnson, who was yelling, into the empty police car. You might not want to make a fuss. When I called the house yesterday to check the gun's serial number, your son's grandma, who I think is an old woman, was very angry. As soon as the agent said that, Mrs. Johnson calmed down. That grandmother is David's grandmother. She is old, but she is still healthy and doesn't show any signs of dementia. She's pretty much in charge of the Johnson family. At this point, Mrs. Johnson is completely giving in to her. She's the head of the family, but she's not mean to other people. When I go to see my in-laws, she's always so happy to see me and calls me Emily dear. She is nice, but Mrs. Johnson has to do her jobs the right way. Her own room and bathroom were taken care of by her. What made her so mad must have been pretty tough, I said under my breath. The detective told me, it looks like your husband's grandmother has been keeping the shooting gun as a keepsake since your father-in-law died. But the other day, the box with the memory in it was broken into. When they found out that, it caused the current fuss. Her anger was unbearable. I see. To get the key, Mrs. Johnson must have searched her whole room. I told her, it's easy to see how angry she would be that her son's keepsake was broken. After handing over the rifle at the station, I asked to take a picture of it for her so she could at least keep a photograph as a memento. I said, my husband's grandmother was mean to Mrs. Johnson. She had cried and said sorry to me and David. A family member who went to pick her up said that she yelled at Mrs. Johnson in a way that could be heard all over the neighborhood for more than 30 minutes. Oh, your grandmother really does get that mad. That's why Mom always did what Grandma said. Now everyone in the neighborhood knows what Mom did wrong, I said. Yes, thanks to his grandma's lecture, the incident became widely known, and Mrs. Johnson could no longer walk the streets. When his grandmother found out that David had broken up with her, she got permission from the police station and the prosecutor's office to send Mrs. Johnson to a farm run by a relative in the Nebraska mountains, in an area that looks like a basin. She could come back, but it would take 3 hours to get here by car. She was working so hard on the farm that she couldn't possibly get away. After some time, it turned out that I was pregnant. The family, my husband, and his grandma were all very happy. His grandmother was already excited about having a great-grandchild and started to work on making her legs stronger. My husband and her are going to fight to see who can take the baby for walks in the pram. I hope she doesn't drop the great-grandchild while holding it. She has also begun to improve the strength of her upper body. It's nice to see her getting her mood back. She was really down because of Mrs. Johnson's fuss. My husband and I are getting all of the baby stuff together today. I'd like to live with your grandmother if it's possible. She's really excited about it, and it looks like she'll live a long time following the birth, taking care of the child with grandma. I told them, we'll figure it out some way. Well, if she lives longer, I'll be happy to. My husband said, I'll talk to grandma about it. I took out the camera. I rubbed my belly and said, when the baby is born, I'm going to take lots of pictures of the baby, my husband, his grandmother, and the rest of the family. Hi, I'm a lady who works as a cook. I recently got married, and I'm really enjoying being a newlywed. I usually keep my past to myself and don't talk much about it. I don't have many friends, but I tell people I grew up like any other kid, even though it wasn't that simple. I had a tough childhood, but I was lucky to have my grandpa who loved me a lot. He was like my only family because I didn't have parents around. My grandpa worked hard, sometimes at construction sites or collecting and selling things like paper or fruits and veggies. I don't have baby photos because we couldn't afford them, but when I turned 6, my grandpa made sure I had a picture taken every year on my birthday to capture my growth. I didn't go to kindergarten, but my grandpa taught me basics like the alphabet and numbers. My grandpa didn't have much money, but he was well respected in our neighborhood. The neighbors would pitch in to help take care of me because they knew my grandpa was working hard to raise me. This meant I got to have warm meals and play with the older kids in the neighborhood, who who taught me a lot of things. When my grandpa finished work, he'd come get me. Our house was small and old, with just one bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It could get pretty uncomfortable in the extremes of weather, but we managed okay. In the summer, my grandpa fixed up an old fan he found, and in the winter, he washed and reused old blankets to keep me warm. He did everything he could to take care of me, even though we didn't have much. Our neighbors were also struggling, but they still helped us a lot. They came to school with me on my first day, took turns attending parent-teacher meetings at my grandpa's request, and even packed food for my school trips as a way to say thank you for his hard work. My grandpa was a handyman who could fix just about anything around the house. In our friendly neighborhood, people helped each other out with their skills, but gossip still circulated. Some folks couldn't help but wonder why my grandpa was raising me alone in such tough circumstances. He never really talked about my parents when I was growing up. Whenever I asked, he'd just say they had passed away soon after I was born and were now in heaven. When I was younger, I thought they had died from some serious illness like cancer. But as I got older, I started hearing different stories, mainly from the women in the neighborhood. They'd whisper about how my grandpa had never been married and how nobody had ever seen my mom or dad. It was confusing because my grandpa had always told me they were my real parents. And if I had parents, shouldn't I have had a grandma too? It didn't add up. As I listened to her, I realized something strange. We didn't have any family photos of my parents, not even one of my grandma. Our photo album only contained pictures that my grandpa insisted we take every year, along with some snapshots our neighbors had taken of us. When I reached middle school and started going through puberty, I began to rebel a bit, questioning my identity more and more. Living only with my grandpa made it even harder. I had so many questions about my parents, and by 9th grade, I couldn't hold them in any longer. I sat my grandpa down and bombarded him with questions, desperate for answers about where my mom and dad were, whether they were alive or dead, and why there were no photos of them or my grandma. I felt like I was interrogating him like a criminal, but I needed to know. As I got emotional and started crying, my grandpa just held me close and reassured me. He explained that my parents couldn't raise me, so they left me with him when I was a baby, hoping to come back for me someday. He showed me a small bracelet they had left behind, saying it was with me when I was born in the hospital. Seeing that bracelet, some of my curiosity eased. Even though I learned that my parents had abandoned me, knowing that my grandpa loved me and raised me with care was enough. From that day on, I started to find some peace within myself. I began to see a way out of the challenges of puberty. College wasn't an option for me due to our financial situation, and I didn't want to add to my grandpa's burdens, so I made up my mind about my career before even starting high school. "Grandpa," I said, "I want to be a cook." I planned to take career classes during my senior year, earn my cooking license, and find a job right after graduation. My grandpa asked if I was sure I didn't want to go to college, offering to do whatever it took to save up for tuition. I reassured him that cooking was my passion and that I wanted to set things up so he wouldn't feel guilty about it. True to my word, once I reached my senior year of high school, I dove into cooking classes and earned several licenses. I secured a job a month before graduation and received my first paycheck just a week after. With it, I bought some steak to celebrate, though I couldn't afford to dine out. Back home, I surprised my grandpa with the steak and handed him an envelope containing some of my earnings. "This is for you, Grandpa," I said. "It's what's left after buying the steaks." My grandpa was speechless. "Patty," he finally said, "I can't accept this. You worked hard for this money. You should use it for yourself. I can't possibly take it." He insisted, pushing the envelope back toward me. "Grandpa, if you don't take it, I'll leave home. Why should you be the only one doing things for me? I really wanted to give you this money," I threatened, feeling a surge of frustration. Eventually, my grandpa relented, tears welling up as he accepted the envelope. He tucked it into a book he enjoyed reading. Sharing that steak meal in the place I'd always called home felt incredibly special. For the first time in my life, I felt proud to do something for my grandpa. We chatted happily as we ate, until a knock interrupted us. Who could be knocking at this hour? My grandpa wondered aloud as I went to answer the door. To our surprise, 2 police officers stood there. "Is Richard O'Leary here?" they asked, and I confirmed that he was my grandpa. "And you must be Patty Rowland?" they inquired, and I affirmed that too. "Both of you need to come with us to the police station," they stated matter-of-factly. When I asked why, they informed us, "Mr. O'Leary is being accused of kidnapping a child. You both need to come with us." I was stunned. Kidnapping? I couldn't fathom why my grandpa was being accused of such a heinous crime. I protested that he wasn't that kind of person, but the police insisted we accompany them. That night, my grandpa and I found ourselves in a police car headed to the station. Despite the gravity of the situation, my grandpa remained oddly calm. We waited in a designated area until eventually, the police returned with some other individuals accompanying them. A woman in her 50s entered the room, accompanied by a couple holding hands. She approached us, pointing accusingly at my grandpa. "That's him. He's the one who kidnapped the president's daughter." She exclaimed loudly, shocked and confused. I demanded answers. "What do you mean? Who did my grandpa supposedly kidnap?" I shouted back at her. The police intervened, trying to calm both the woman and me down. Behind the shouting woman, the couple stepped forward, and the woman addressed me with tears in her eyes. "Are you Patty?" she asked, and I awkwardly nodded in response. Suddenly, she embraced me and burst into tears. "Patty, it's Mom. I'm your mother." Her words hit me like a bolt from the blue. I was stunned and bewildered, but my grandpa's composed demeanor added to my confusion. He stood up calmly and addressed her. "So, you finally returned. Only now. Are you okay?" The woman in her 50s scoffed, accusing my grandpa of kidnapping. I vehemently protested his innocence, while the couple watched on, clearly perplexed. The woman in her 50s went on to explain that a couple had visited her orphanage, claiming they had left their baby there and had now returned to reclaim their child. They left behind a letter stating their intention to return for the child, along with hospital paperwork. I was about 3 or 4 at the time. However, despite searching through records and adoption papers, we found nothing about the child. Then, a distant memory surfaced. There was a child who went missing years ago, causing a major commotion. Despite reporting to the police and filing missing child reports, she was never found. I recalled an old man who used to work at the orphanage abruptly quitting around that time. He had been overly attentive to the children, and I had considered firing him before he vanished. Could he have been involved in kidnapping a child from the orphanage, leaving behind a distraught woman? We underwent DNA testing as my grandpa calmly observed the couple. He asked the police, "Are they truly Patty's parents?" The police insisted we wait for the results. Then, my grandpa pleaded with the officers, offering to stay in jail if necessary, but asking for the chance to tell his side of the story. Grasping the officer's hands, he began to speak. The police acknowledged his right to defend himself. Grandpa agreed to share his story once the DNA confirmed the couple's parentage. Reluctantly, the police consulted the couple, who agreed to the arrangement if it meant hearing the truth. While awaiting the DNA results, my grandpa remained at home under recognizance, and I continued my routine, going to and from work. 2 days later, the DNA results came in, showing a 99.99% match. After 20 years, I finally met my parents. Hearing the news, I was overcome with a strange mix of emotions. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, but my parents embraced me, soothing my sobs. The orphanage director glared at my grandpa with fury, as if she could kill him on the spot. "Now you must arrest this old man for kidnapping. Were you planning to ruin my establishment?" She raged, her anger palpable. True to his word, my grandpa began his tale, producing a stack of papers from home and presenting them to the police one by one. "It's true that I worked as a janitor at the orphanage, not far from where I live now," he began. "One morning, I arrived early to find a young child sleeping outside the orphanage, curled up in a ball. I assumed she had been abandoned by her parents. Concerned for her well-being, I tried to bring her inside, but she woke up and, with her black eyes, called me Grandpa. Grandpa continued, explaining how the child handed him a bag containing a doll, paperwork, and a letter promising to return for their daughter. I took her into the orphanage where she began to live, he recounted. While cleaning, I often saw the child, but she always seemed to have a dark expression. It wasn't until about a month later that I discovered the reason. The woman was abusing her, especially when the orphanage faced financial strain due to overcrowding. Another child had arrived, and she took out her frustration on this poor girl. Grandpa described how the child was forced to do arduous chores, her hands red and bleeding from the harsh treatment. I confronted the director multiple times, urging her to stop mistreating the child. He continued, but instead of listening, she fired me. As I was leaving, I couldn't bear to see the child so unhappy. That's why I did what I did, my grandpa explained, his voice tinged with remorse. He recounted how he had taken me in after witnessing the neglect and abuse I suffered under the orphanage director's care. The director didn't even bother to read the documents in the bag. He continued, neglecting her duties and subjecting me to abuse. That's why I took Patty in to protect her and raise her as my own granddaughter. After his revelation, the police and I were left in a state of uncertainty. The orphanage director, however, remained defiant, accusing my grandpa of fabricating stories to tarnish her reputation. "I'll sue you for slander," she threatened, her voice dripping with venom. The police pressed my grandpa for evidence to support his claims. With confidence, he mentioned a former employee, Mrs. Cumberland, who could attest to the abuse. While we awaited Mrs. Cumberland's testimony, I was speechless, grappling with the truth unfolding before me. In the late afternoon, Mrs. Cumberland arrived at the police station, armed with photographs she had taken of my injured hands and other signs of abuse. My parents, upon seeing the evidence, were overcome with emotion. The undeniable proof left the orphanage director cornered, and my parents wasted no time in announcing their intention to sue her for her crimes. Despite her pleas for forgiveness, she was arrested and charged with child abuse. That night, my grandpa and I returned home, the weight of the day's revelations heavy on our minds. From my parents, I learned the heartbreaking truth. They had left me at the orphanage due to financial hardship, hoping to reclaim me once they were stable. When they finally returned, they discovered I was missing and unregistered. Only recently did they learn of the possibility that my grandpa had taken me in. Although their actions couldn't be excused, my parents found solace in the fact that they had finally found me after years of searching. They faced repercussions for abandoning me, but now they sought to alleviate their guilt. I harbored no resentment toward my parents. I was simply eager and anxious to finally meet them. Nor did I hold any blame toward my grandpa, who had saved me and showered me with love and care during my time with him. His unwavering support was the reason I couldn't hate my parents. I assured them that I understood their circumstances and expressed gratitude for their efforts to find me. As my mom hugged me, tears streaming down her face, she knelt before my grandpa. Without him, I wouldn't have had such a wonderful upbringing, she acknowledged. Despite his protests, my parents insisted on taking care of him and urged us to live together as one family. Eventually, we moved in with my parents, but the adjustment wasn't easy, as we had spent more time apart than together. Eventually, my parents arranged for a separate house for my grandpa and me next to theirs, allowing us to live comfortably while still being close to family. After work, we would gather for dinner and watch TV together, just like any other family. After I got married, my parents invited my grandpa to live with us, and we seamlessly merged into one big family. Meanwhile, my parents pursued legal action against the orphanage director, adamant that they couldn't forgive her. During the proceedings, I met my husband, who was working as a prosecutor on the case. He admired my grandpa's selflessness in raising a child who wasn't his own for nearly 2 decades. It made me reflect on whether I could have done the same in his shoes. I hold my grandpa in the highest regard and wish him a long and healthy life. Thank you all for listening to my story. Your support and comments mean a lot to me. Wishing you all a day filled with happiness and good fortune. Hey there, I am a woman in my 40s. I've had my license as a real estate agent for more than 10 years. People often tell me I'm a great real estate agent. People tell me I'm a good real estate agent, but that doesn't mean I can tell you how much a house will go up or down in value. But based on my experience and careful research, I can tell by looking at the cadastral map what the land is worth now, how it could be developed, and how the land's surroundings could be used to make money. I can then predict whether the land's value will go up or down because of these factors. Making a judgment would be a better way to explain it. In any case, I've used these skills to help my in-laws when they were in trouble. My marriage was great. Everyone in my family was nice, including my husband, my father-in-law, and my other in-laws. They all loved me so much, even though I was their youngest daughter-in-law. Because my father-in-law had been sick for a long time, I was taking care of his assets. My wife's dad owned a lot of land and needed the help of a real estate agent who knew what they were doing. I raised my father-in-law's properties by reinvesting in good places while I was taking care of his lands. I didn't mean to be greedy by taking his land for myself or anything like that, of course. I was lucky enough to live with these nice people as if I were family. One day, I was just enjoying my life when my mother-in-law showed up out of the blue. I thought his mother was dead because that's all I had heard about her since I met my husband. Something very strange happened. Why did her family and my husband say she was dead when she was still alive? It was strange how my husband and his father treated my mother-in-law after seeing her again after many years apart. Even though she was married and had given birth to my husband, they all talked about her like she wasn't there, even though she was a mother and wife. I asked my husband straight out, "Is there something I should know? Because I'm naturally interested. Why are you curious?" I said, "Of course, I'm interested. Strangely, everyone told me that your mother was dead, but she is still alive and well. She also acts like she just got back from traveling after being gone for decades. Then you and your family are treating her as if she's a non-existent person. So it's so confusing," I told her. He didn't say anything. Yes, that's right. Now that I think about it, you never held a service for her. That means you knew your mother, I said. Even if she died on the street somewhere, we wouldn't have done anything to remember her, he said. Oh my God, do you think that woman is my mom? Isn't she somebody else? Is she not your birth mother or the woman who gave birth to me? I had a question. She gave birth to me, but she's not my mother. We decided she wasn't going to be her mother after she left us and moved in with someone else while my dad was in bed recovering from surgery. The truth is that I'm glad she left us and ran away. I wish she wasn't my mother even before she left, my husband said. I learned that my in-laws, who were always getting along, had a lot of problems in the past after hearing my husband's sad story. They thought my mother-in-law was dead when she was still alive. I'll start with the conclusion. It was because my mother-in-law was a bad wife and mother. When he was younger, my father-in-law was very poor. Now he owns a lot of land and is very rich. He was so hungry that he would be lucky to eat one meal a day. His wife hated how poor they were, so she left her family behind and ran away at night. His mom was never a good person, even before she ran away. My husband's dad worked as a day laborer on building sites and was often gone looking for work in faraway places. Her young children did all the housework while she sat around most of the time. It was worse when my father-in-law wasn't home when my mother-in-law did bad things. The bad weather would make her mad, and when the food arrived cold, she would lose it. Then one day, my father-in-law got so tired at work that he couldn't stand up and walk anymore. He was unable to make a living. Then my husband's mother-in-law left, leaving her sick husband and young children who still needed her care. They were just making up words when they said she was playing at night because she really took anything valuable in the house. She didn't pay attention to her husband or her young children, who were pleading with her for food. As a mother, it wouldn't be easy for her to take all the money and important things, right? All of my in-laws and my father-in-law had lived as if my mother-in-law were dead. Given the circumstances, who could still care about my mother-in-law after she came back after decades? I could 100% understand how they felt. But I have more of a fear and dislike for my mother-in-law because she left her family in the past. My father-in-law was dying after a long illness when my mother-in-law finally came back after being gone for decades. She didn't ask about her husband's health at first, though she asked for something else. You must be the youngest daughter-in-law. So what I heard was that you're a real estate broker and you have been managing the family properties, right? She sought answers to. How did you understand that? You don't need to know how I knew. How many homes does my husband own? It was my turn. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. All of my father-in-law's businesses are in his own name. Get permission from my father-in-law if you're really interested. Have you heard from my husband? I told her that the one who is married to your father-in-law is me. I heard. I added, why aren't you my mother-in-law? She's not even the mother of my husband and his family. Ha! Since he was a kid, my youngest son has been stupid. So how did he get a wife like you? Hello, my name is Mary, and I'm your mother-in-law. You should be careful because I don't think someone like you could be my mother-in-law. I'm not that simple, she said. Are you being territorial right now? I inquired. You'll find out soon whether it's my being territorial or not, she said. After that, I began to look into my mother-in-law's life. It was clear that she had come back with a different goal in mind, to steal the inheritance. But I still needed to be sure every once in a while. People can turn over a new leaf at the end of their lives after having done many bad things. After a bad event, I had to make sure that my mother-in-law's comeback after decades wasn't a one-of-a-kind case, and that she wasn't trying to get the inheritance like I thought she was. Then I had to figure out how to keep my in-laws safe from her evil greed. Also, who said, perhaps turns inevitably. Like I thought she would be, my mother-in-law was just like that. It wasn't a surprise that my mother-in-law left her family and ran away at night over the past few decades. She had been cheating on other people and stealing from them her whole life. People thought it was cute that she lived off of other people's money and never paid it back, even though she had a criminal record for many frauds, because she was a terrible con artist. Once I knew who my mother-in-law really was, I checked to see if the cops or FBI had put her on a list of people they wanted to catch. She had just gotten out of jail, so she wasn't on the list yet. I felt bad that my mother-in-law wasn't on that list. You might say that's a mean thing to think, but no matter how nice you are, you couldn't say that I was mean after hearing my story. It was too bad that my mother-in-law wasn't on the wanted list, but I didn't have time to make plans to protect my in-laws and me from my greedy mother-in-law, who was after the estate. It was on the day that my father-in-law died that I carefully told everyone what I knew about my mother-in-law. My in-laws and I were more concerned with holding a proper service than with coming up with a way to stop my mother-in-law's greed. But I was worried the whole time my mother-in-law's funeral was going on because she didn't show up. My mother-in-law finally showed up on the day of the funeral. If the cops had a list of people they were looking for, I thought the problem would be fixed right away. She sneaked up on them and looked around, hoping to find a basket full of money bags that people had left to send their condolences to the family. You can't find the gift basket, can you? I asked her with a smile. Next, I was going to look at the envelopes for the guests and sort the cash. Then I would talk about the gift. The basket went away though, didn't it? She asked. What are we going to do, right? I looked down my nose at her. That's you. You're the one giving it to them instead of me, she yelled. Would I have to leave that out without checking? I already knew what kind of person you were. You're so sneaky. How much money do you think that is? I found out how much property my illness has left behind, I replied. Oh, you didn't even go to the funeral because you were eager to learn that, right? So when I see you, maybe things will turn out the way I thought they would. This is what I always do when I see you, I said. Be quiet. I'm not a queer person. In the eyes of the law, I'm the first person in line. Everybody should hand everything over to me, no matter what you and my kids say. That probably won't happen. so you should know that, she warned. Since you are married to my father-in-law, I promise you won't get any family money. I must admit that the warning I gave my mother-in-law was a bit of a trick. Even though my father-in-law was sick because he died so quickly, my in-laws and I were not able to make any plans for how to deal with my mother-in-law's greedy behavior. As expected, she started showing how greedy she was in order to get her husband's big inheritance all to herself. She sent proof to my in-laws right away that her marriage to my father-in-law was still legal. It showed that people knew about what was being sent to the court to get my father-in-law's will certified. Even though she had been tried many times for fraud while committing crimes, she knew a lot about how the court system worked, which helped her. I talked to a few lawyers on behalf of my husband and his family only. Everyone who worked as a lawyer gave the same answers. It is possible to keep your mother-in-law from getting the estate if you want to. That's great. They asked, what's the way? You need to go to court. You need to ask the court to officially declare that the marriage between your father-in-law and mother-in-law is over. In this way, you can avoid a trial. It won't be simple, they said. Then, I replied, that's probably why I said it happens. Since your father-in-law died, it will be even harder. They went on, it's probably the same no matter which lawyer you meet, because the courts aren't very friendly when it comes to divorce and inheritance issues. One piece of advice I can give you is that most of the time, pretty good deals are made in this situation. It won't be as stressful as going to court. We don't want an agreement that most people would think is reasonable in this case, they said. Okay, I'll be back when the trial is over. When my husband and his family heard that lawyers thought it would be hard to fight with his mother, they were upset. People should always be able to get in touch with the government. But as a real estate agent who deals with land and property, I found court fights very strange and hard to predict. Additionally, regular people like my husband and in-laws felt like they had no choice but to carry the weight. My husband and his in-laws did not agree to a ridiculous deal, though, because they did not want to recognize their mother's role as their mother. In order to cheer them up, I gave them a small bit of hope. Why should our silly game make us the victims? Since I was the youngest daughter-in-law, I had all the responsibility, so I asked him to trust me and not worry. That's how my husband and his in-laws chose to get ready for court. Of course, I wasn't crazy about my confidence. There was only one thing that was certain. I was sure that my mother-in-law didn't have enough money to go to court over the estate. There would be no reason for my mother-in-law to send proof that she is married or try to steal money from the money basket at my father-in-law's wake if she could afford a lawyer and go to court. And this time, too, my mother-in-law never did anything to change my mind. As if to show that she couldn't afford to hire a lawyer to go to court, she broke into my in-laws' house with some neighborhood bad guys, made a scene, and demanded that the property's title be transferred. The marriage license and driver's license that my mother-in-law waved at us were her weapons. She had no shame at all. She yelled, "Look, aren't you crossed off as your dad's wife? He has never formally split up with me. Yes, is that right? If you know, you should first change how you feel." "You jerk in front of my mom," she screamed. "This is how I think my father-in-law would act if he were still alive. You stole everything valuable from the house and then went away, leaving your sick husband and young children behind. How dare you drool over a house?" I replied, "Don't you think I know you're doing this because you're afraid to lose? You must have been told by the lawyers that I'm the most important person in the court case about the inheritance, right? So you must know something about the law since you've been to and from court. Okay, Mrs. X, convict. Is that not true?" I pushed back. "That was a long time ago. It's possible to mess up." "How many times have you been convicted of a crime, huh?" she asked. "I made a mistake." "Who believes that? Did your friends who are in prison tell you that? But you're just that to our family. A liar, a criminal, a former prisoner, and a bad thief who didn't show up for decades," I said. "Hey, lawyers said that. The marriage between you and my father-in-law will have been over a long time ago if you go to court. We won't have to pay you anything if that's proven. It's clear that you have no idea how hard it is to go to court because you talk too much. One thing I know for sure is true. You know how tough fights can get. You also don't have the money to hire a lawyer, which is why you're making a scene here. You want the fortune but don't want to go to court, I said. She stumbled and said, You, that's not us though. Remember that I am enough to carry that weight by myself. Stay away from our family if you don't want to see something worse. I'll be nice and buy you a hamburger, even a combo, if you promise that. Watch out, I said. Let's see if you can be the last person standing and laughing. The things I said to my mother-in-law were planned ahead of time by my in-laws and me as a way to get my mother-in-law to bring those thugs to put even more pressure on us. They did exactly what we asked them to do so we could get real proof. They smashed things in the house and said they would beat all of my in-laws. All of those moves were caught on camera by cell phones that my in-laws kept hidden. To get what we wanted as much proof as possible that my mother-in-law was violent and made threats. But my husband got home in the middle of the chaos. He had left to prepare the case against my mother-in-law at the lawyer's office a few hours before she and those thugs started causing trouble. He held a piece of paper in his hands and had a shocked look on his face. My in-laws were also stunned when they saw the piece of paper. It was clear that they were feeling completely hopeless. The paper was quickly taken away and read with great pleasure by my mother-in-law. My husband found my father-in-law's will after the fact. What was written in the will was shocking. The notice said that my mother-in-law would be inheriting a big plot of land. If things keep going this way, the family will see my mother-in-law as their mother, and they will give my mother-in-law the land and everything else they own. The land that was left to the family in the will was so big that it could fit several soccer and baseball fields. I changed my mind after carefully looking at the land register address and started to look for my mother-in-law. Let me tell you the truth, I said. It was all a lie to talk about the court case. Since you are legally married to my father-in-law, I really didn't think we would win the hearing. You're good at going into great detail about things that are clear. Still, wouldn't having the land and it will be enough to make all your dreams come true. How do you know I'm a licensed real estate agent? It's big enough to hold a lot of soccer and baseball fields, I thought. Then there was a small smile on my mother-in-law's face. Using my energy to help me, I kept convincing her. To be honest, we don't think we can win the court case. However, if things go this way, you will also have to go through a lot of mental pain. Do not worry. Have you ever seen a rich person lose a case? It's something I've never seen before, doesn't it? This case will go all the way to the Supreme Court when it starts. Because of this, you won't be able to get your fortune until the hearing is over. First, I'm going to file an order to stop you from getting it. It will take at least a few years to go through all the requests to get the money. How could you wake up after all those years of worry when that great land was right there in front of you? What do you want to say? We should find a middle ground instead of going to court with each other. You will get the land and finish it instead. Please just write a note of promise. For the land written in the will, you will give up the rest of your inheritance and leave the rest behind. You can choose to take that huge piece of land right now without any trouble, or you can fight with everything you have for years and go to court to get everything written in the will. I want to stress again that the land mentioned in the will is huge, enough to fit many soccer and baseball fields, I said. If I sell that much land, I will have enough money to live on for the rest of my life without having to work. My mother-in-law said, That's a great deal, kid. May I just sign and put my thumbprint here? Without a doubt, it will happen, right? Should we get ready right away with the ink stamp? She asked excitedly. Now you're finally making sense. This is something you should have done a long time ago, I told him. My wife's mother got very excited and signed a promissory note that said she would only inherit the lands listed in the will. She gave up her right to receive the rest of the estate and signed it with her thumbprint. We had it notarized. She had no idea what bad things would happen next. My wife's mother called a few days after she signed a note promising to take only the land listed in the will. When I talked to my mother-in-law on the phone, her voice was weak and whiny. As planned, sweetheart. I just came to check out the land I inherited. There's a problem. How is the land? How is it that there are mountains on all four sides? There aren't any roads or houses nearby, she said. To be polite, I asked, is there anything else? A hiker says this land is a refuge of some kind, she said. So, you're in the mountains now. I had a question. That's correct. She told him, I think I must have come to the wrong place. I think you went to the right place. What if the land is a safe place? A place where nature can be protected. Don't even dream about growth or anything like that. Be careful as you go down. You could hurt a natural habitat, and that would add another crime to your record, I told him. After I said that, I put the phone down. Finally, my husband, my in-laws, and I cheered. How did that take place? Weren't we sucked dry by my mother-in-law the day she broke into my in-laws' house with those thugs? When I looked at my father-in-law's will, I saw that my mother-in-law got a huge piece of land. I was sure that the land was my father-in-law's punishment and a threat to my mother-in-law. It was true that the land was big enough for many baseball and soccer fields. What was important was the type of land it was on. It was in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains, away from any roads or towns. There have been no plans for growth at all. It was an area for protecting nature that could never be built on. That being said, the market price was already very low, and there was no chance that it would go up. I knew that because I had been in charge of my father-in-law's land for a long time. There was no way we didn't know it, but everyone did. I even got my mother-in-law to agree to give up other inheritances at the end of the fake plea. When my mother-in-law got the land that couldn't be quickly sold and turned into cash, she couldn't even pay the estate taxes. She lost all of her money. As planned, she called me one more time because she was so desperate. The caller made threats and asked for money. She asked, "Now, what are you going to do?" I laughed. It was written down that she would give up her right to other inheritances. And I even had video of her breaking into my in-laws' house and threatening and harassing us. I told her in a mocking way that she could do anything to go back to jail. With a sigh, my mother-in-law hung up the phone and didn't answer again that day. Finally, there was peace between my in-laws and me again. In today's language, my father-in-law got even by working with his four sides and his daughter-in-law, who was a real estate salesman. Now I'm raising the value of the assets by taking care of my in-laws' fortune, which was a gift from my father-in-law. Because none of our kids are like my mean mother-in-law, my husband, and I have become great parents. How did she get away? Every year, she gets caught up in the Paladin mess because she hasn't paid her estate and land taxes on time. My in-laws and I had dinner together yesterday. All over again. I thought they were all very nice and kind people. That makes me miss my husband's dad even more. We love each other, and I want to spend the rest of my life living happily ever after. Father, please keep an eye on us. Please cheer for me and leave wise words in the area for comments. It really helps me when you click like and subscribe. Have a great day.